You know, sometimes the biggest stories are hiding in the tiniest details. We're about to dive into basically a 2,800-year-old cold case. It's an investigation sparked by just one single cryptic line in an ancient text, a line that points to a catastrophe that literally shook the world. So let's crack this case file open.
Okay, so here it is. This is our central clue. The book of the prophet Amos. It doesn't kick off with a king's reign or some famous battle. No, it starts with a very specific timestamp, 2 years before the earthquake. And you got to pay attention to that word the, not an earthquake, right, but the earthquake. This tells us this wasn't just some random tremor. This was an event so infamous, so well known that it didn't need any other introduction.
And that right there is our central question. What was the earthquake? I mean, why was this thing so catastrophic that it became a benchmark in time, a moment that everyone just knew about? To figure this out, we've got to follow two different trails of evidence. First, we're going to follow the paper trail, and then we're going to follow the trail of destruction that's literally buried right under our feet.
All right, so let's start with the texts. For centuries, this earthquake was way more than just a memory. It was a reference point. You see it echoing through historical and religious writings long after the ground stopped shaking.
And what's really incredible here is just how long this memory lasted. Get this, over 250 years after Amos, the prophet Zechariah brings it up again. He talks about people literally fleeing from the earthquake in the days of King Uzziah. I mean, this was clearly a legendary event. But believe it or not, the story doesn't even stop there.
Okay, now let's fast forward some 800 years after the event itself. The historian Josephus, he comes along and adds these incredible, almost supernatural details. He talks about a giant crack opening up in the temple, a sunbeam striking the king's face, and boom, the king immediately gets leprosy. You can see how the historical memory is starting to morph into this dramatic legend, a full-blown tale of divine intervention.
So the king at the center of this whole story, Uzziah, he definitely left his mark on history. But there's another artifact connected to him that serves as a really crucial lesson, a lesson in just how carefully we have to interpret ancient evidence. So you might see this famous Uzziah tablet and think, wow, a direct link to the king. But check out the timeline. There's this massive, nearly 800-year gap between when Uzziah died and when this tablet was actually carved. So no, this is not a tombstone from his time. Not even close. What it actually is a plaque marking a reburial of his bones centuries later, probably when Jerusalem was expanding. And here's the crucial takeaway. While it totally confirms Uzziah was a real historical king whose memory lasted for ages, it's not contemporary evidence. To find that, well, we're going to have to put on our hard hats and turn to the archaeologists. Okay, this is where the investigation gets physical. We're moving away from the echoes in ancient texts and getting our hands dirty, so to speak, in the rubble. And what modern science has uncovered is a trail of destruction that is, honestly, nothing short of staggering.
So check this out. Archaeologists who are digging all across the region started noticing something weird. And all these major sites, we're talking Hazor up in the north, Gath out west, even Jerusalem itself, they all found a synchronized layer of destruction. And it all dated to the exact same time period, the mid-8th century BCE. This wasn't one city falling to an enemy, this was an entire region getting slammed all at once.
And the evidence itself, it tells the story of what happened. This wasn't a conquering army. You don't see any burn layers, no stockpiles of weapons, none of that. What archaeologists found instead were things like tilted walls, floors that had just dropped out, massive stones cracked and thrown around. At one site, Gath, a 13-foot thick wall was just knocked completely onto its side. This was the clear signature of a massive natural disaster.
So how big was it? I mean, just how powerful are we talking here? Well, based on the sheer geographic spread of the damage and geological core samples from the Dead Sea, scientists have come up with an estimate that's almost hard to believe, a magnitude of around 8.2. To put that in perspective, this seems to be the single largest earthquake documented on the Dead Sea Transform Fault in the last 4,000 years.
And it wasn't just the raw power. It was how long it lasted. The violent shaking is estimated to have gone on for over 90 seconds. Think about that, 1.5 minutes of non-stop, violent shaking. That terrifying length of time, it really helps explain Zechariah's account of people actively fleeing while the disaster was still unfolding around them.
So to really put that 8.2 magnitude into perspective, let's look at some other quakes. The deadliest known earthquake in history, the one in Shaanxi, China, that was a slightly smaller 8.0. The devastating 2010 earthquake in Haiti, that was a 7.0. Now, we don't have a death toll for Amos quake, but in terms of sheer power, this thing was just completely off the charts. So it seems like case closed, right? We've got a massive quake, confirmed by geology, confirmed by archaeology, and it lines up perfectly with the biblical accounts. What more could you want? Well, this is where the investigation takes a really fascinating and very critical turn.
Okay, to understand what's going on here, we need to quickly talk about a logical fallacy called circular argumentation, or circular reasoning. It's basically when you assume the very thing you're trying to prove. It's like saying, my argument is true because my argument says it's true. Your conclusion is already baked into your starting point.
And this leads to the huge question that critical scholars started to ask. It goes like this. Did archaeologists find a generic destruction layer from the 8th century and then, because they knew the story in the book of Amos, did they decide to pin the date specifically to 760 BCE? Because if that's what happened, you can't then turn around and claim the archaeology proves the biblical story. You've just created a perfect self-reinforcing loop. And listen, this isn't just some hypothetical problem. This is a real critique. Some scholarly analyses, like one that went back and looked at the original excavation report from the site of Hazor, they point to this exact issue. They call the dating a classic case of circular argumentation. The argument is that the biblical text was basically used to fine-tune the archaeological date. So ultimately, we're left with two main ways of looking at all this evidence. On one side, you have the corroboration view. This says, look, the alignment between the physical evidence and the texts is just too strong to be a coincidence. But then you have the critical view, which says, hold on, the connection is compelling for sure, but we have to be really cautious because of these big interpretive challenges.
So where does all this leave our cold case? After following the clues through ancient texts, through geology, through archaeology, and now through the debates of modern scholars, what's the final verdict on the earthquake?
Okay, let's just weigh the facts one more time. Fact number 1, the physical evidence is undeniable. A massive earthquake did devastate the region around this time. Fact number 2, the timing of this physical event aligns incredibly well with the reigns of the kings mentioned in the Bible. Fact number 3, the explicit link between the two hinges entirely on that one specific timestamp in the book of Amos. But, and this is a big but, fact number 4, because of that risk of circular reasoning, we have to be really careful about calling this definitive, scientific proof of the text.
So, what's the most likely scenario here? Well, it's probably this. A real, absolutely devastating earthquake did happen. It was an event so powerful, so completely unforgettable, that it basically seared itself into the collective memory of the people. It became a time marker. You know, a before and after moment that a writer like Amos could just drop into his text, knowing that every single person reading it would understand exactly what he was talking about.
And that really leaves us with a final, bigger question. Maybe the real story here isn't just about whether archaeology can prove a single line of text. Maybe it's about something much more profound. Maybe it's about how we, as humans, record, remember, and build stories around the epic catastrophes that shake our world to its very foundations.